Most people think drinking alcohol is a modern problem. It is not. Your ancestors were perfectly intoxicated long before civilization even existed. In fact, your brain may have evolved specifically to crave it millions of years before humans invented brewing, which means that feeling you get after a drink is ancient. It is older than farming, older than history, and possibly older than humanity itself. Once you realize this, human evolution starts looking completely different. You are wired for it. The story begins far away from any modern city. It begins in the dense, suffocating heat of a prehistoric jungle. Imagine the jungle floor millions of years ago, completely covered in crushed, rotting fruit. In that intense tropical heat, nature was already running its own silent brewery. Wild yeast consumed the natural sugars inside the fallen fruit. Alcohol appeared automatically. Long before humans even knew what fermentation was, the environment was already steeped in it. But your primate ancestors were not looking for a party. They were looking for survival. This brings us to a fascinating concept known as the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis, proposed by Dr. Robert Dudley at UC Berkeley. The idea is completely brilliant, fundamentally true, and also slightly unsettling to realize. In a massive, dense forest, finding enough food to avoid starvation was a daily, brutal challenge. Fresh fruit is incredibly hard to find hidden in those dark green canopies. But as fruit ripens and rots, it produces a very distinct, powerful scent, the smell of alcohol. That smell acted like a giant invisible beacon guiding hungry primates directly to the most caloric food available. Rotting, fermenting fruit contained significantly more calories than fresh fruit. Evolution programmed your ancestors to follow that scent, because finding it meant living another day. They were not consuming alcohol for entertainment. They were consuming it as a primary food source. Drinking, or rather eating alcohol, was a literal survival strategy. The primates who could track that smell and tolerate the fermented flesh thrived. The ones who could not simply starved. It was a brutal biological filter. Your earliest ancestors survived the unforgiving jungle precisely because they were naturally drawn to the intoxicating scent of rotting fruit. Nature made alcohol a necessity. It was embedded into the daily diet of the species, shaping their movements, their habits, and their bodies over countless generations. For millions of years, this was just the normal, natural way of life. The jungle provided, and the primates consumed. It was a perfect, unbroken cycle of survival driven by the scent of fermentation. And then something bizarre happened. Why didn't they just die instantly? Alcohol is literally a deadly poison. Consuming rotting, fermented fruit off the jungle floor every single day should have easily killed your very own ancient ancestors. Instead, it made them dramatically stronger. Why would evolution ever care about a toxic substance like alcohol? The answer is hidden deep inside your DNA right now. Scientists studying human origins discovered something that is absolutely incredible. About 10 million years ago, our primate ancestors randomly evolved a very specific, powerful genetic mutation. This mutation permanently changed a digestive enzyme called ADH4, making it dramatically better at breaking down and metabolizing ethanol. Think about that, 10 million years ago. Long before the first humans ever walked the earth, biology was already preparing your body to process alcohol. At first, this biological adaptation makes absolutely no logical sense. Why would nature design an enzyme specifically for intoxication? But then, researchers realized something highly disturbing. The primates that developed this exact ADH4 mutation were completely immune to the toxic effects of rotting fruit they desperately needed to survive. They could easily eat the highly caloric fermented food, absorb the critical energy, and keep moving without getting violently ill. The unfortunate primates without the mutation simply could not handle the ethanol. They rapidly weakened. They slowly starved. They just completely died out. This means that one of the fundamental reasons your bloodline survived the brutal prehistoric world is because your ancestors were genetically superior at digesting fermented fruit. That is not a joke. You are carrying a massive ancient survival mechanism inside your stomach at this very moment. Your physical relationship with alcohol is ancient. It is literally written into the genetic code of your entire existence. But this is exactly where the timeline of human history gets incredibly weird. Because eventually, human beings completely stopped relying on the natural jungle to rot their fruit for them. They stopped scavenging for natural fermentation and decided to take absolute control of the entire process. And that strange decision permanently changed human civilization and the entire world as we know it today forever. For millions of years, alcohol was just an environmental accident. But then humans eventually did something completely unnatural. They stopped waiting for wild fruit to rot and started manufacturing it on purpose. Most people are taught a very simple, comfortable version of human history. You were probably told that human civilization began because our ancestors wanted stable food. They wanted bread. So they invented agriculture, settled down, built farms, and eventually formed complex cities. But modern archaeology now reveals something far stranger. Human civilization might not have started because we wanted to eat. It might have started because we wanted to drink. Deep inside Raqefet Cave in modern Israel, researchers uncovered massive stone mortars carved directly into the bedrock. These incredibly heavy stone basins were built 13,000 years ago by the ancient Natufian culture. Think about that timeline for a second. This was long before cities existed, before kingdoms existed, completely before humans ever invented farming, which raises a highly disturbing question. How did prehistoric hunter-gatherers somehow convince massive groups of wild, completely independent people to stop migrating, gather together, and aggressively carve solid rock before written language even existed? The answer changes everything. They were not grinding wheat to bake daily bread. Hidden deep inside those ancient stone basins, researchers discovered the chemical residue of something completely unexpected. It was a fermented beverage. It was early beer. 13,000 years ago, before agriculture was even a functional concept, ancient humans were already systematically brewing alcohol for elaborate, organized ritual feasts. They were coordinating massive, complex labor projects for one specific, undeniable reason: to gather and consume alcohol together. Beer history actually comes before bread history. The primal desire to artificially brew alcohol was so incredibly powerful that it literally forced nomadic humans to finally settle in one single place. Human farming itself may have been invented simply because these ancient societies desperately needed a massive, reliable supply of harvested grain just to keep brewing their beer. They did not settle down to merely survive. They settled down to actively ferment. And once they made that choice, the entire trajectory of human evolution permanently shifted. But this ancient alcohol looked absolutely nothing like the modern filtered drinks you see today. And that single fact completely changes the entire story. Because for early humans, consuming alcohol was not a luxury. It was literally a matter of life and death. For most of ancient history, drinking ordinary water was incredibly dangerous. It was completely full of deadly microscopic parasites and invisible bacteria. Entire communities could easily die just from taking a single sip from the wrong river. But ancient humans accidentally discovered something terrifyingly important. Fermented drinks were actually safe. The intense process of early brewing naturally killed the dangerous pathogens. But you need to understand that this ancient alcohol was completely different. It was all very weak. It was practically a thick, cloudy, fermented grain soup. They were not drinking it to party. They were drinking it strictly to survive. Mildly alcoholic liquid was essentially the only safe water available, which leads to a completely mind-bending realization. Sober water was actually more dangerous than alcohol. Civilization literally survived on fermentation, and that is exactly what makes modern human behavior so deeply unsettling. For thousands of years, humans survived by consuming this weak, fermented liquid every single day. We built an absolute unbreakable reliance on it. It solved a deadly biological problem. But it also permanently wired our nervous system to constantly seek out that specific chemical reaction. Which brings us all the way back to the very beginning. Back to the stifling heat. Back to the dense tropical forest, back to the jungle floor covered in rotting fruit. Because the entire history of human survival is really just the history of chasing that exact same evolutionary instinct over and over again. Long before any modern cities existed, nature was already running a brewery, and eventually one very strange, desperate primate species became completely obsessed with following that scent. That one specific species was actually us. Even today, humans gather around tables and bars in the exact same fundamental way our ancient ancestors gathered around massive stone basins. We just modernized the container. The real mystery is not why humans drink today. The real mystery is how a species shaped by millions of years of chemical adaptation could ever completely stop. Because whether it is a prehistoric jungle floor, an ancient cave in the desert, or a modern city glowing under bright neon lights, humanity has been desperately chasing the exact same feeling. And somewhere deep inside the dark, ancient structures of your brain, your primitive ancestors still are. The truth is sometimes far stranger than we could ever imagine. If you want to continue decoding the absolute deepest mysteries of humanity and our ancient past together, this is Zenn. I will see you soon.